Lieutenant Commander Sarah Knight Fox Chun adjusted her headset one final time as she settled into the cramped cockpit of her F/A-18 Super Hornet. The carrier deck beneath her vibrated with the constant hum of activity, but her focus remained laser-sharp on the mission briefing that had concluded just 30 minutes earlier. Tonight would mark her 15th combat sortie over hostile territory, yet something felt different about this operation. The briefing room had been tense, filled with the usual mix of seasoned pilots and fresh-faced aviators who still jumped at every catapult launch. Admiral Harrison Webb, a decorated SEAL commander who had recently been assigned to oversee joint operations, had made his presence known from the moment he walked through the door. His reputation preceded him, a hard-charging warrior who had earned his stars through decades of ground combat, but who made no secret of his skepticism about naval aviation's contribution to modern warfare. Webb had studied the mission parameters with the intensity of a predator examining prey. The target was a heavily fortified enemy communications hub nestled deep in mountainous terrain, surrounded by sophisticated air defense systems that had already claimed 2 Allied aircraft in the past month. Intelligence suggested the facility was coordinating attacks against coalition forces across 3 different sectors, making its destruction a top priority for theater commanders. When the tactical discussion turned to pilot assignments, Webb's eyes had settled on Sarah with unmistakable doubt. Her call sign Night Fox had been earned through her exceptional performance during night operations and her ability to slip past enemy defenses undetected, but Webb clearly remained unconvinced. He questioned whether a pilot with her background could handle the precision required for such a high-stakes mission. Sarah had maintained her professional composure throughout Webb's pointed questions, even as she felt the weight of every pair of eyes in the room. Her squadron commander, Captain Mike Rodriguez, had defended her record without hesitation, citing her flawless mission completion rate and her innovative tactics that had saved countless lives. But Webb's expression remained unchanged, his doubt hanging in the air like smoke from a blown fuse. The doubt wasn't entirely unfounded, Sarah knew. She had come to naval aviation through an unconventional path, having started her military career as an intelligence analyst before transitioning to flight training. Her technical background gave her unique insights into enemy systems and capabilities, but it also meant she lacked the traditional fighter pilot pedigree that many senior officers expected. Some viewed her analytical approach as overthinking, preferring the aggressive instincts that had defined naval aviation for generations. As she ran through her pre-flight checklist, Sarah reflected on the conversation that had followed the formal briefing. Webb had approached her directly, his voice carrying the weight of command authority mixed with genuine concern. He questioned whether she truly understood the stakes involved, whether her unconventional background had prepared her for the intensity of combat against a sophisticated enemy. His words hadn't been cruel, but they cut deeply nonetheless. The other pilots in her squadron had offered their support, knowing her capabilities firsthand. Lieutenant Jake "Hammer" Morrison, her usual wingman, had been particularly vocal in his confidence. They had flown together through some of the most challenging missions of the deployment, developing an almost telepathic understanding of each other's movements and intentions. His faith in her abilities meant everything, especially when facing skepticism from senior leadership. The mission itself would test every skill she had developed over her career. The enemy communications hub was protected by overlapping radar systems, surface-to-air missiles, and fighter patrols that had proven deadly to previous attackers. Success would require perfect timing, flawless execution, and the ability to adapt when inevitable complications arose. Failure would mean not only her own death, but potentially the continuation of enemy attacks that claimed more coalition lives each day. Sarah completed her final systems checks and signaled her readiness to the deck crew. The familiar routine of carrier operations proceeded around her with clockwork precision, each sailor and officer playing their part in the complex ballet that launched aircraft into harm's way. As she waited for the signal to launch, she thought about Admiral Webb's doubts and her own determination to prove him wrong. The catapult officer raised his hand, and Sarah felt the familiar surge of adrenaline that preceded every combat mission. Whatever happened in the next few hours would define not only her own reputation, but potentially change Webb's perspective on what a pilot like her could accomplish when given the chance to prove herself. The catapult shot Sarah forward with crushing force, pressing her deep into her ejection seat, as her Super Hornet accelerated from 0 to 150 miles per hour in less than 3 seconds. The familiar sensation never got old, but tonight it carried additional weight. Every mission could be her last, but this one felt particularly significant given Admiral Webb's obvious skepticism about her capabilities. As she climbed away from the carrier's deck, Sarah established communication with her wingman and the other aircraft in their strike package. The mission would require precise coordination between multiple elements: electronic warfare aircraft to suppress enemy radar, tankers to provide fuel for the long transit, and her own strike fighters to deliver the actual attack. Each piece had to work perfectly for the mission to succeed. The intelligence briefing had painted a detailed picture of their target. The enemy communications hub sat in a valley surrounded by steep mountains, its location chosen specifically to make aerial attack difficult. Radar installations on surrounding peaks provided overlapping coverage, while mobile surface-to-air missile systems could be repositioned quickly to counter incoming threats. Previous reconnaissance had identified at least 12 defensive positions, each capable of engaging multiple aircraft simultaneously. Lieutenant Morrison's voice crackled through her headset as they established their formation. His experience and steady demeanor had made him an ideal wingman, someone she could trust completely when the situation turned dangerous. Together, they had developed tactics that maximized their aircraft's capabilities while minimizing exposure to enemy fire. Tonight, they would need every advantage they could create. The flight to the target area took them over friendly territory initially, allowing Sarah to focus on her navigation systems and weapon preparation. Her aircraft carried a mixed loadout designed for the specific challenges they expected to face. Precision-guided bombs would handle the main communications equipment, while air-to-air missiles provided protection against enemy fighters that intelligence suggested might be operating in the area. As they approached the border between friendly and hostile territory, the electronic warfare officer's voice filled the communication channel with updates on enemy radar activity. The sophisticated detection systems were already sweeping the airspace, searching for any sign of incoming aircraft. Sarah adjusted her flight path to take advantage of terrain features that would mask her approach, using valleys and ridgelines to stay below the radar horizon as long as possible. The night sky provided both advantages and challenges for their mission. Darkness offered concealment from visual detection, but it also made navigation more difficult and increased the risk of controlled flight into terrain. Sarah's night vision systems painted the landscape below in ghostly green hues, revealing the rugged mountainous terrain they would need to navigate during their attack run. Intelligence reports had indicated that enemy fighter patrols were active in the area, though their exact locations remained unknown. Sarah monitored her radar display continuously, watching for any sign of hostile aircraft that might threaten their mission. Her training had emphasized the importance of maintaining situational awareness while focusing on the primary objective, a balance that required constant attention and quick decision-making. The first sign of enemy activity came from the electronic warfare aircraft flying ahead of their formation. Radar emissions were intensifying as they approached the target area, indicating that defensive systems were becoming aware of potential threats. Sarah adjusted her tactics accordingly, using terrain masking and electronic countermeasures to reduce her aircraft's radar signature while continuing toward the objective. As they neared the target area, Sarah reviewed the attack plan one final time. The approach would require them to fly through a narrow valley, pop up over a ridgeline, acquire their targets visually, and deliver their weapons before enemy defenses could react effectively. Timing would be critical. Too early, and they would face the full weight of defensive fire. Too late, and they might miss their opportunity entirely. Morrison's aircraft remained in perfect formation beside her, his discipline and professionalism evident in every maneuver. The trust between them had been built through countless hours of training and previous combat missions, creating an understanding that required minimal radio communication. Each pilot knew what the other would do in various situations, allowing them to react as a single unit rather than two separate aircraft. The valley approach began exactly as planned, with both aircraft hugging the terrain to avoid radar detection. Sarah's hands moved automatically across her controls, making minute adjustments to maintain proper spacing and altitude while preparing her weapons systems for immediate employment. Everything they had trained for was about to be put to the ultimate test against an enemy that had already proven capable of downing experienced pilots. The target area appeared ahead of them, illuminated by the faint glow of equipment and personnel activity. Sarah could see the communication antennas and buildings that intelligence had identified, but she also noticed additional defensive positions that hadn't appeared in their briefing materials. The enemy had reinforced their installation since the last reconnaissance mission, adding mobile missile systems that could significantly complicate their attack run. Sarah's heart rate spiked as she identified the additional defensive positions that intelligence had missed. 3 mobile SAM sites had been positioned since the last reconnaissance sweep, their radar dishes already beginning to track her formation as they approached the target area. The mission parameters had just become significantly more dangerous, but turning back now would mean losing a critical opportunity to disrupt enemy communications. She keyed her radio to alert Morrison and the mission commander about the changed tactical situation. The additional threats would require them to modify their attack approach, potentially exposing them to defensive fire for a longer period than originally planned. However, Sarah's analytical background kicked in as she rapidly assessed alternative approaches that might allow them to complete the mission while minimizing their exposure. The original plan had called for a direct approach over the main ridgeline, but the new SAM positions made that route potentially suicidal. Sarah identified an alternate path that would take them through a narrow canyon system, approaching the target from an unexpected angle that would mask their presence until the final seconds before weapon release. The route was more challenging from a navigation standpoint, but it offered their best chance of success. Morrison acknowledged her suggested route change immediately, trusting her tactical judgment based on their previous missions together. The mission commander's approval came moments later, authorizing them to proceed with the modified approach despite the increased risks involved. Every member of the strike package understood that mission success depended on eliminating this communications hub before it could coordinate additional attacks against coalition forces. As they entered the canyon system, Sarah's situational awareness reached maximum intensity. The narrow passage between rock walls required precise flying while she simultaneously monitored her navigation systems, weapon status, and communication with other aircraft. Night vision revealed the jagged terrain rushing past her canopy, close enough that any navigation error could prove fatal within seconds. The electronic warfare officer's voice provided continuous updates on enemy radar activity, confirming that their alternate approach was working as intended. The new flight path kept them below the radar horizon for most of the approach, though they would still face intense defensive fire once they popped up to acquire their targets. The element of surprise would be crucial during the brief window when they were exposed to enemy weapons. Morrison's aircraft remained in perfect formation despite the challenging flying conditions, his experience and skill evident in every control input. The trust between them had become absolute during their deployment together, allowing Sarah to focus on navigation and target acquisition while knowing her wingmen would maintain proper position regardless of the circumstances they encountered. As they approached the final waypoint before their pop-up maneuver, Sarah armed her weapons systems and prepared for the most dangerous phase of the mission. Intelligence had estimated they would have approximately 30 seconds of exposure time before enemy defenses could react effectively, but the additional SAM sites meant defensive fire would likely begin much sooner than originally anticipated. The communication hub appeared on her targeting display exactly where intelligence had predicted, its distinctive antenna array clearly visible through her night vision systems. Sarah identified the primary targets, the main communication building, and 2 backup transmitter sites that would need to be destroyed to ensure complete mission success. Her precision-guided weapons had been programmed for each target during the mission planning phase. At the designated coordinates, Sarah pulled her aircraft into a sharp climb to clear the final ridgeline before the target area. The maneuver exposed both aircraft to enemy radar simultaneously, triggering immediate defensive responses from multiple SAM sites. Missile launch warnings filled her headset as surface-to-air weapons began tracking their aircraft with deadly intent. The first missiles appeared as bright streaks against the night sky, their rocket motors creating unmistakable signatures on her threat warning systems. Sarah initiated evasive maneuvers while maintaining her attack heading, using chaff and flares to confuse incoming weapons while keeping her targeting systems locked onto the communication facility below. Morrison's aircraft was also under attack, with at least 2 missiles tracking his Super Hornet as he maneuvered violently to avoid destruction. Radio discipline broke down as both pilots called out threats and defensive measures, their training taking over as they fought to survive long enough to deliver their weapons against the target. Sarah's targeting system achieved lock-on just as a SAM detonated close enough to her aircraft to rattle her instruments and send shrapnel pinging against her fuselage. She released her first precision-guided bomb toward the main communications building while simultaneously braking hard left to avoid another incoming missile. The weapon's guidance system would handle the final targeting, but she needed to survive long enough to assess the results. The night sky erupted in defensive fire as every enemy weapon system engaged the 2 attacking aircraft simultaneously. Tracer rounds created deadly light shows, while missile contrails crisscrossed the darkness, each one representing a potential death sentence for the pilots trying to complete their mission. Sarah's training and experience guided her through the chaos, but she knew their survival depended as much on luck as skill. Her second weapon release targeted the backup transmitter site, the bomb separating from her aircraft just as another SAM exploded close enough to shower her canopy with debris. Morrison's voice crackled through the radio static, confirming his own weapon releases while reporting battle damage to his aircraft from the intense defensive fire they were receiving. The first explosion illuminated the valley floor in brilliant orange as Sarah's precision-guided bomb found its target with devastating accuracy. The main communications building erupted in a fireball that could be seen for miles, secondary explosions indicating that critical equipment had been destroyed. But the mission was far from over, and both aircraft remained under intense fire from the remaining defensive positions. Morrison's aircraft shuddered as shrapnel from another near-miss peppered his fuselage, but he maintained his attack heading long enough to release his weapons against the secondary targets. His bombs impacted moments after Sarah's, creating additional explosions that sent debris cascading down the mountainside. The backup transmitter sites disappeared in clouds of smoke and flame, their sophisticated equipment reduced to twisted metal and scattered electronics. Sarah initiated her escape maneuver immediately after weapon release, diving toward the valley floor while dispensing chaff and flares to confuse the remaining SAM systems. Her aircraft's threat warning system continued screaming warnings as multiple missiles tracked her movements, each one representing a potential catastrophe that could end her career and her life in a split second. The escape route took them through the same canyon system they had used for their approach, but now enemy fighters were scrambling to intercept them before they could reach friendly territory. Sarah's radar display showed multiple airborne contacts climbing rapidly from an airbase that intelligence had thought was inactive. The enemy response was more rapid and coordinated than anyone had anticipated. Morrison's voice came through the radio with forced calm as he reported hydraulic system damage and reduced control authority in his aircraft. The battle damage was affecting his ability to maneuver, but he was maintaining formation despite the mechanical problems. Sarah quickly assessed their options, knowing that a damaged aircraft would be extremely vulnerable to fighter attack during their transit back to the carrier. The electronic warfare aircraft supporting their mission provided critical assistance by jamming enemy radar systems and communications, but Sarah knew the interference would only delay the inevitable intercept attempt. Enemy fighters would rely on visual acquisition once they reached the general area where the strike aircraft were operating, making concealment increasingly difficult as they moved toward friendly airspace. As they exited the canyon system, Sarah identified 2 enemy fighters approaching from the northeast at high speed. The aircraft appeared to be modern interceptors capable of engaging targets at extended ranges, exactly the type of threat that could prevent their escape. She immediately alerted Morrison while adjusting their flight path to take advantage of terrain masking and electronic countermeasures. The damaged Super Hornet was struggling to maintain formation, its reduced maneuverability making Morrison increasingly vulnerable to both surface and air threats. Sarah made the tactical decision to position her aircraft between her wingmen and the approaching enemy fighters, accepting additional risk to herself in order to protect her battle-damaged partner. Her air-to-air missiles came online as the enemy fighters closed within engagement range, their targeting radars painting both American aircraft with increasing intensity. Sarah waited for the optimal firing opportunity, knowing she would likely only get one chance to engage before the enemy weapons reached their own launch parameters. The first enemy fighter began his attack run just as Sarah achieved missile lock-on, his intentions clear from his aggressive maneuvering and targeting behavior. She launched her first AIM-120 missile while simultaneously initiating evasive action, the weapon streaking away into the darkness toward its intended target. The second enemy fighter immediately began defensive maneuvers, indicating that both aircraft were aware they were under attack. Sarah's missile found its mark with devastating effect, the enemy fighter disappearing in a brilliant explosion that briefly illuminated the entire valley. But the second fighter had achieved firing position on Morrison's damaged aircraft, and Sarah watched in horror as an enemy missile separated from the attacker's wing and began tracking her wingman with deadly precision. Morrison initiated the most violent evasive maneuvers his damaged aircraft could manage, but Sarah could see immediately that it wouldn't be enough. The enemy weapon was closing rapidly, and her wingman's reduced maneuverability made effective defensive action nearly impossible. Without hesitation, Sarah positioned her own aircraft between the incoming missile and Morrison's Super Hornet. The enemy weapon's proximity fuse detonated when Sarah's aircraft crossed its flight path, creating a massive explosion that hammered both American fighters with shrapnel and blast effects. Sarah's instruments flickered as electrical systems suffered damage, but her aircraft remained controllable despite multiple warning lights illuminating across her panel. Morrison's voice came through the radio with obvious relief as he confirmed that the missile had been defeated, though both aircraft now carried battle damage that would complicate their return to the carrier. The second enemy fighter had broken off his attack after witnessing the destruction of his wingman, apparently unwilling to continue the engagement against determined opposition. Sarah assessed her aircraft's condition while maintaining their heading toward friendly territory. Multiple systems showed degraded performance, and she could feel unusual vibrations through the controls that suggested structural damage from the missile explosion. But the Super Hornet was still flying, still responding to her inputs, and, most importantly, still capable of making it home with Morrison safely beside her. The electronic warfare officer's voice filled their headsets with confirmation that no additional enemy fighters were airborne, allowing both pilots to focus on aircraft recovery procedures rather than continued combat operations. But Sarah knew their challenges were far from over, as landing a damaged aircraft on a carrier deck at night represented one of aviation's most demanding tasks. The carrier's deck appeared as a distant beacon of light against the dark ocean as Sarah and Morrison approached for their emergency recovery. Both aircraft were trailing slight vapor streams from damaged hydraulic lines, testament to the intensity of the combat they had just survived. The tower's voice guided them through the approach procedures with professional calm, but Sarah could hear the underlying tension that always accompanied battle-damaged aircraft returning to the ship. Morrison's aircraft was in worse condition, with primary flight controls degraded and backup systems operating at reduced capacity. Sarah maintained close formation with her wingman throughout the approach, ready to provide assistance if his mechanical problems worsened during the critical landing phase. The night carrier landing was challenging enough under normal circumstances, but attempting it with damaged aircraft required exceptional skill and no small amount of luck. The landing signals officer talked both pilots through the approach with steady professionalism, his experience immediately apparent in the calm confidence of his voice. Sarah's own aircraft was handling reasonably well despite the battle damage, but she could feel subtle changes in the control responses that indicated structural stress from the missile explosion. Every control input required additional concentration to ensure proper aircraft response. Morrison trapped successfully on his first attempt, his tailhook catching the arresting wire despite the mechanical problems that had plagued his aircraft throughout the return flight. Sarah felt a wave of relief as she watched her wingman's Super Hornet come to a safe stop on the carrier deck. His survival had been her primary concern throughout their escape, and seeing him safely aboard removed a significant weight from her shoulders. Her own approach proceeded normally until the final moments before touchdown, when a hydraulic warning light illuminated on her instrument panel. The system failure wasn't critical, but it would affect her aircraft's handling characteristics during the landing itself. Sarah quickly ran through the emergency procedures while maintaining her glide path, her training taking over as she compensated for the degraded system performance. The touchdown was firmer than normal, but her tailhook engaged the arresting wire cleanly and brought her aircraft to a controlled stop within the designated recovery area. As the engines spooled down and deck crews rushed to secure her aircraft, Sarah felt the familiar mixture of exhaustion and exhilaration that followed every successful combat mission. But tonight carried additional significance that went beyond normal mission completion. Admiral Webb was waiting on the flight deck as Sarah climbed down from her cockpit, his expression unreadable in the harsh lighting of the carrier's deck operations. She expected another round of questioning about her performance, perhaps criticism of the tactical decisions she had made during the mission. Instead, Webb approached with what appeared to be genuine respect in his demeanor. The debrief session in the squadron ready room attracted more senior officers than usual, reflecting the mission's strategic importance and the unusual circumstances surrounding its execution. Sarah and Morrison provided detailed accounts of their engagement with enemy forces, emphasizing the tactical adjustments that had been necessary when they discovered additional defensive positions at the target site. Intelligence officers confirmed that satellite imagery showed complete destruction of the communications facility, with secondary explosions indicating that critical equipment had been eliminated beyond any possibility of rapid repair. The enemy's ability to coordinate attacks across multiple sectors had been seriously degraded, potentially saving coalition lives that would have been lost to future coordinated strikes. Webb listened to the entire debrief without interruption, his attention focused intently on every detail of their tactical decision-making process. Sarah noticed that his questions focused not on her qualifications or background, but on the specific choices she had made during the most critical moments of the mission. His perspective seemed to be shifting from skepticism to professional interest. When Morrison described how Sarah had deliberately positioned her aircraft between his damaged Super Hornet and the incoming enemy missile, Webb's expression changed noticeably. The SEAL Admiral clearly understood the significance of that decision, the personal risk Sarah had accepted to ensure her wingman's survival. Such actions spoke to character traits that transcended any concerns about conventional pilot backgrounds or training pedigrees. The formal debrief concluded with commendations for both pilots, recognition of their tactical flexibility, and combat effectiveness under extremely challenging conditions. But Sarah noticed that Webb remained in the ready room after the other officers departed, apparently wanting to speak with her privately about something that hadn't been covered during the official session. Webb's conversation was unlike anything Sarah had experienced from senior leadership. Instead of the formal command relationships she expected, he spoke to her as one professional warrior to another, acknowledging that his initial skepticism had been based on incomplete understanding of her capabilities. He admitted that watching her performance during this mission had fundamentally changed his perspective on what made an effective combat pilot. The Admiral's respect had been earned not through traditional fighter pilot credentials, but through demonstrated courage, tactical intelligence, and commitment to mission success regardless of personal cost. He recognized that Sarah's analytical background had actually enhanced her combat effectiveness, allowing her to adapt quickly to changing conditions and make decisions that ultimately saved lives. As Webb prepared to leave, he made a comment that would stay with Sarah for the remainder of her career. He noted that call signs were earned through actions, not assigned through bureaucratic processes, and that Night Fox had proven herself worthy of the name through performance under fire. Her unconventional path to naval aviation had become a strength rather than a limitation. Standing alone in the ready room after Webb's departure, Sarah reflected on the night's events and their broader significance. Admiral Webb's respect meant more than any official recognition, representing acceptance from a warrior culture that valued proven performance above all other considerations. She had faced doubt and proven herself through action, earning her place among the Navy's most capable combat pilots through the most demanding test possible.